He punched Maya Johnson in the face right there in front of families and children because he thought his badge made him untouchable. But Maya wasn't just a woman on her day off. She was an FBI agent, and that single act of violence would ignite a storm he never saw coming. What happens when a bully in uniform discovers he hit the one person who can end his career? If this shocks you, and share, because now here's how it all unfolded. I remember the heat first. Noonlight flattening the city square air so thick it pressed on your shoulders. Workers were bolting, trussed for a weekend concert. Kids chased each other between folding chairs. Parents hovered with lemonade cups. It was noisy in a gentle way, the kind of noise that says nothing bad happens here. She moved through it like anyone on a day-off canvas tote on her shoulder, a baguette jutting out peaches, bumping together with a soft thud. Later I'd learn her name was Maya Johnson, and later still I'd learn she worked counterterrorism for the FBI. In that moment, she was just a woman who looked like she finally had a quiet Saturday. I caught her pause, not the pause of someone checking a text or admiring a vendor's flowers, more like the pause of someone doing math in their head. Her eyes tracked left, then locked. I followed her gaze. The propane tank was impossible to miss once you were looking for it, big. White, stenciled with warnings penned in by a lazy loop of yellow tape. A temporary fix for the concert, I guessed. The tape fluttered, which would have been charming if it didn't mark the border between ordinary life and something that could go very wrong. 10 feet from the tank, a cop leaned against a lamppost as if the pole was doing the job for him. Officer Bradley Cole, white guy, early 40s, thick in the middle, the way a uniform isn't built to forgive shirt tugged and creased around the buttons. He had a cigarette pinched between two fingers. He drew on it slow, then let the smoke slide out into the heat like he owned the air. I watched Maya watch him. A breeze shifted and the smoke ribboned toward the big black letters on the tank that said, "Flammable." You didn't need a training manual or a badge to understand the problem. Fire plus fuel plus crowd is not a math problem you want to solve in public. The square kept carrying on hammer clinks, a child's laugh, a bus sighing at the curb. That's what struck me, how normal everything felt while a bad idea happened in plain sight. Maya adjusted the tote higher on her shoulder. She didn't rush. There was something measured about the way she moved a pace that said she respected the scene enough not to startle it. If you've ever seen someone step into a situation with their mind already 3 steps ahead, you know the feeling. It's a calm that makes you pay attention. She stopped a few feet from him. The distance was polite, almost ceremonial. Cole drew again, pretending not to notice the cherry of his cigarette flaring like a dare. Heat shimmered off the asphalt and the smell of smoke mingled with the sweet of bruised fruit from Maya's bag. For a second, it felt like the whole square held its breath. I couldn't hear her words yet, but I could read the posture, head-level shoulders, loose palms open. The posture of a person offering a reasonable way out. If you've lived long enough, if you've worked under bosses or stood in lines that never move you, learn what it looks like when someone gives you a chance not to embarrass yourself. Cole flicked ash. It floated down and vanished into the glare. He didn't shift his weight. He didn't even turn his head. The uniform hung wrong on him, like the authority and the fabric were both a size too small, and he'd decided the solution was to pretend the seams weren't straining. Maya glanced toward the tank just once, then back to him. It wasn't fear, it was calculation. I have no doubt now, knowing who she is, knowing what she's trained to see, that she was running through contingencies in real-time wind direction, crowd density, the nearest metal barricade, the gap between tape and tank, the best angle to speak from, so he didn't feel boxed in. The sun did that thing it does on hot days where it bleaches color out of everything. The yellow tape looked pale. The blue on Cole's sleeves looked tired. Even the peaches in Maya's bag seemed washed out. The only sharp color was the ember at the end of his cigarette. You'd think someone else would step in. There were plenty of us around. That's the strange part about crowds. The more of us there are, the easier it is to believe someone else will handle it. We all became spectators to our own safety. Maya didn't wait for the crowd to find its courage. She squared her stance by a fraction enough to plant herself, but not enough to look aggressive. The tote shifted again. The baguette tapped her hip. Small sounds in a big heat. Cole finally turned. Not fully, more a slow swivel of the chin, a glance over the top of a cheap attitude. The look he gave her wasn't curiosity, It was annoyance that something in his afternoon required effort. I could see her face now, calm in the way good bridges are calm, built for weight. No tremble at the yom, no darting eyes. Just a steady focus that seemed to shrink the space between the cigarette and the word flammable down to a single line. Around us, a worker shouted for a socket wrench. A balloon squeaked against a stroller. Life kept pretending it didn't notice the match beside the fuse. Here's what I remember most before a single word I could make out. I understood intent. Maya's intent was simple: remove a risk before it becomes news. Cole's intent was simpler: prove he didn't have to take advice, especially not from a stranger who didn't come wrapped in deference. She lifted a hand, palm low, the universal gesture for "I'm not here to fight." The gesture felt almost old-fashioned, like something you do in a quieter era when neighbors knew each other's names. It made sense for her. It invited him to choose the decent version of himself if he had one. He took another drag. Heat pressed harder. Smoke drifted again. I found myself counting the inches in my head distance from ember to tape, from tape to tank, from tank to the little boy standing with a lemon ice his grandfather had just bought. The math made my mouth go dry. Maya's eyes flicked to the boy, then back to Cole. It was quick, but it said everything. This isn't just about you and me. And that's where part one of this story really lives, in the space between a reasonable request and the pride that stands in its way. In the pause before good judgment or bad temper decides what happens next. In the moment, a woman on her day off chooses whether to be a bystander or a citizen. You could feel her decision settle, not dramatic, not loud, just final. She stepped closer, still careful, still calm, and the square still pretending to be ordinary, tilted by a degree you could only sense if you were there. I stepped closer until their voices carried cleanly through the heat. Maya kept a respectful distance, far enough not to crowd him, close enough to be heard without raising her voice. She set her feet, shoulders relaxed, chin level. When she spoke, it was steady, like she'd practiced, saying hard things in easy tones. "Oh, officer," she said, "would you please put out the cigarette? You're standing very close to a propane tank. That's dangerous for everyone here. No edge, no attitude. Just the kind of request you make when you're trying to keep a Saturday from turning into a headline." Cole didn't turn. He drew long and slow, the ember brightening, then tilted his head back and blew smoke into the slice of air between them, as if he were fogging up a mirror only he could see. The smoke drifted toward her face. Then he gave her a sideways glance, a sliver of eye behind mirrored shades. "Who are you?" he said. "Safety patrol. Some caring out for her daily complaint." It wasn't curiosity. It was the bored taunt of a man who believes boredom is proof of control. Maya didn't flinch. "I'm a concerned citizen," she said. "There are families and small kids all around. I'm asking for your cooperation." She kept her hands open at her sides so he could see them. That detail stuck with me. People who intend to escalate don't show you their hands like that. Cole's mouth twitched, almost a smile, almost a snarl. He flicked ash. It broke midair, scattered and vanished into the heat shimmer over the asphalt. He still hadn't moved his feet. Around us, the square reacted the way crowds do when they sense a scene forming. A dad pushing a stroller steered wider than he needed to. A woman in a sun hat paused, frowned, then decided that her errands were urgent in the other direction. One of the stagehands turned up a radio, like that could drown out responsibility. There's a particular silence people make together when they don't want to be involved. It's not quiet, it's strategic noise. Maya tried again in the same tone. "Please, it only takes a second." He finally turned his head just enough to aim the full weight of his stare. The lenses of his sunglasses caught the white of the tank, the yellow tape, the peach blush of the fruit bruising in Maya's bag. His eyes were invisible. His posture wasn't. "You think you know my job," he said. "You think you're going to teach me about safety?" "It's not about your job," Maya said. "It's about risk, right there." She tipped her chin toward the tank. "I'm asking you to help lower it." A small voice piped up nearby. "Papa, can we see the balloons?" And then went quiet when the father noticed where the smoke was drifting. He tugged the kid by the wrist. They moved. Two teenagers slowed phones halfway out, then put them back like they'd remembered a rule. At the edge of the square, a boy, maybe 14, black rail-thin in a faded team hoodie, hesitated by a bench. He pulled a phone from his pocket. His thumb hovered. He looked right left back at Maya. His hands trembled the way hands do when your heart goes too fast. But he lifted the phone anyway and framed the two of them in the screen. He looked scared. He also looked decided. Maya noticed him. She didn't show it. Her gaze stayed on Cole, her voice still even. "Sir, please." Cole snorted. "You're real polite," he said. "You practice that in the mirror." He took another drag. Up close, I caught a hint of sour beneath the tobacco, the kind of stale-edged booze leaves when the sun hits it. His shirt pulled across his middle like a belt that had given up. The badge gleamed the only polished thing about him. "Look," Maya said, "I'm not trying to embarrass you. I'm trying to keep people safe." He repeated the word like it tasted bad. Embarrass. That's when he smiled for real, a slow lean-back grin that said he'd found the point of the afternoon. Not the smoke, not the crowd, not the tank. The point was that someone had suggested he do something, and now he got to decide whether to do it. "Tell you what," he said, "you can keep walking, and I can keep doing my job." "You can do both," Maya said. "Put it out, and we can both keep walking." He rolled his shoulders as if limbering up for an argument. "You got a badge I should know about?" he asked. "No," she said, the truth in the moment. "Then carefully, you have one. Use it for what it's for." The boy with the phone shifted to get a clearer angle. His elbow bumped the bench. The tap sounded too loud in the heat. He flinched, steadied himself, set his jaw. A vendor in an apron glanced over, made eye contact with me, and then busied himself with a stack of paper plates. We both knew that look. We both knew the math. If this went wrong and no one had footage, the story would belong to whoever wrote it first. Maya softened her voice, but not her stance. "Officer, please." He sighed. "Lady, you don't know when to quit. I know when to ask one more time," she said. "I'd like to tell you someone stepped up, then the dad with the stroller, the teens with their half-drawn phones me. What happened was smaller and more honest people drifted. Heads turned away. A few pairs of eyes narrowed, calculating risk job record, afternoon plans. The square kept pretending to be a place where nothing bad happens." Cole tipped his chin toward Maya's tote. "You want to make yourself useful, you can pick up your fruit and go home." "They're fine," she said. "We're not." A thin line of smoke curled past the word flammable, like underlining. Heat trembled. Somewhere behind us, a hammer dropped the clatter, startling in the pretend calm. Maya took a half step closer, then stopped. She was careful about space, careful about angle, careful not to crowd a man looking for a reason. Her palms stayed open, her voice stayed low. "I'm not here to argue," she said. "I'm here because one careless spark ends this day the wrong way. Please put it out." He tilted his head. Or what? There it was, the hinge the moment swings on. Not the danger, not the reason, but the dare. His question wasn't about cigarettes or propane. It was about whether he had to listen to someone who wasn't him. Maya didn't answer the dare. She answered the danger. Or someone gets hurt. He laughed. It was short and dry and meant to be humiliating. "Lady, the only thing getting hurt is my patience." Behind him, the boy steadied his grip and zoomed in. The lens caught the mirrored sunglasses, the red tip of the cigarette, the white curve of the tank. I saw his lip catch between his teeth. I saw him decide again. "Last ask," Maya said, and the phrase was so gentle it nearly passed for courtesy. "Please." Cole's jaw set. The square seemed to tip one more degree. You could feel it, how a decent way out was still sitting there on the table and how a man with something to prove was about to push it off with the back of his hand. The crowd didn't know it yet. The boy with the phone didn't know it yet. I didn't know it yet. But looking back, this was the last quiet second before the day changed. The last breath before pride shoved past prudence. He tapped the cigarette. Ash fell. He smiled. And I watched Maya hold the line polite to the final inch. Cole finally lifted his chin the way men do when they're about to stake the ground as theirs. His voice cut sharp through the heat. "I'm the law here. If you're smart, you'll walk away right now." It wasn't shouted. That would have given too much away. It was low, tight, the kind of tone meant to remind everyone in earshot who wore the badge. Maya didn't move. Her voice stayed level, almost quiet, but it carried. "Your duty is to protect, not to threaten. You could feel the words land, not like a slap, but like a pin pressed into an overinflated balloon. Cole's expression tightened. His face flushed deeper under the sun, and when he exhaled, there was more than tobacco in it. The sour tang of liquor drifted across the space between them. You didn't need to be an expert to smell that he'd started his shift with a bottle instead of coffee. Something twisted behind his sunglasses. A muscle jumped at his jaw. His nostrils flared. For a second, it looked like he might laugh it off, but pride has a way of choosing the fight over the retreat. He shoved off the lamppost, his boots scuffing the pavement. The ground seemed to tremble with the weight of his decision. One thick finger jabbed hard into Maya's shoulder. "No one tells me what to do," he growled, especially not some mouthy woman who thinks she knows better. The crowd didn't gasp, didn't murmur. They folded in on themselves. Heads dropped, eyes slid away. A father pulled his daughter a little closer. A couple turned their backs, suddenly absorbed in the fountain's spray. Silence can be loud when it's the sound of everyone pretending not to see. Maya didn't stumble. She didn't even shift her footing. Her body looked still, but her gaze held steady, sharp as glass. She had faced men with bombs strapped to their chests, warlords who decided life and death over tea. One drunk cop with a badge wasn't going to shake her core. Still, the image was stark, her frame small, shoulders square but slim. His bulk looming shirt soaked with sweat, fabric straining at the seams. His eyes, bloodshot and restless, scanned her like a threat he couldn't name but couldn't ignore. Drops of perspiration rolled down his temple, catching the sunlight, making his anger glisten. It wasn't just size against fire, it was arrogance against calm, heat against stone. And if you were standing there, you could feel it, the way the air thickened, the way breath got caught in throats. Only one person didn't look away. That boy at the edge of the square phone held against his chest like a shield. His hands shook so hard the frame wobbled, but he didn't stop. His lips moved as if whispering to himself, "Keep filming. Don't stop. Keep filming." His heart was pounding. You could almost see it in the rise of his hoodie. And yet he stood there, the only witness brave enough to hold a lens between power and truth. Cole leaned closer to Maya, his shadow stretching across her. The scent of stale alcohol, sweat, and burning tobacco hung heavy, mixing with the sweet rot of fruit that had spilled from her bag. The square around them felt smaller now, like the walls of a room closing in. Even the laughter of children in the distance sounded muffled, bent by the pressure between these two figures. Every detail told you something was about to snap. The cop's jaw clenched tighter. Maya's calm held firmer. The boy's finger hovered above his screen, ready to lock the image if the moment went bad. And everyone else, they chose the comfort of denial. Looking away. Walking faster. Pretending their city square wasn't seconds from becoming a battlefield of ego and defiance. It was the kind of silence that comes right before glass shatters. The kind of quiet where you know something is going to break, you just don't know who will throw the first blow. Maya's voice was calm, almost gentle, but it carried the firmness of someone who had already decided she wouldn't back down. "Officer, please, put out the cigarette. This isn't just about me, it's about everyone in this square." For the briefest second, I thought the words might land. She had left him a way out, a chance to save face without admitting defeat. But pride is a louder voice than reason. Cole's jaw locked, the muscles working beneath the sheen of sweat on his face. His teeth ground audibly, and then he barked back, his voice echoing across the open space. "Respect, you want respect. I'll show you what the law looks like." It came fast, without warning. His arm swung, his fist cut through the heavy air, and then impact. The sound was sharp, hollow, brutal. Not just a thud, but the crack of knuckles meeting flesh with intent. Maya's sunglasses shot from her face, clattering onto the concrete. Her canvas bag slipped from her shoulder, groceries spilling in a cascade. A peach burst open on the hot pavement, its juice spreading dark across the gray stone. A baguette split in half, rolling into the gutter. It looked like a still life painting ruined by sudden violence. Her head snapped sideways and blood welled along her lip, stark against her skin. She staggered, one knee buckling, but she refused to fall. The square for an instant froze, no one breathing, no one moving. Then the shock rippled outward. Gasps broke the silence. A grandmother snatched her young grandson by the wrist, pulling him away with a speed that came from pure fear. "Come, baby, don't look," she whispered, her voice shaking. A man in work boots muttered a curse under his breath, dragging his wife by the arm. A group of teens lowered their phones as though the sight of authority striking had erased their courage to record. And through it all, Cole stood taller, chest puffed, like a man who believed he had just proved a point. He flexed his hands, shaking out the sting of his own blow, and grinned. "There now, shut your mouth before I really arrest you." It wasn't just arrogance. It was the smugness of someone certain. No one would ever challenge his word. The square split itself in two. Those who hurried away, faces averted, and those who lingered on the edges, unable to look but unable to leave. Silence and fear coated the air heavier than the summer heat, but one figure didn't turn away. The boy, the skinny 14-year-old with the phone flinched so hard when the punch landed that the screen jolted wildly. His arms trembled, his breath stuttered, and the camera nearly dipped out of frame. But he clenched his jaw, tightened his grip, and lifted it again. His eyes were wide, wet, terrified, but there was something in them resolve. He whispered to himself under his breath, almost like a prayer, "Don't stop. Keep filming." His lens captured everything, the strike, the fall of fruit, the smear of blood. His heart was pounding so violently, you could almost see it in the way his hoodie shook against his ribs. But he didn't run. He stood. Maya brought a hand to her mouth. Blood slicked her fingers as she drew a deep, steady breath. You could see her body absorb the blow, her mind already deciding how she would answer it. Slowly, deliberately, she straightened. She bent not to gather her ruined fruit, but to retrieve her sunglasses from the ground. One lens was cracked through the middle. She hooked them onto her blouse. To anyone else, it looked like she was just tidying herself. But hidden inside that frame was something Cole couldn't see, a pinhole camera recording everything in perfect detail. Cole smirked, convinced the moment was over, that his fist had closed the argument and won the day. Around him, the crowd shrank back in fear, reinforcing his belief that he owned the narrative. He thought her silence meant defeat. But Maya was still standing, blood at her lip, her shoulders squared against the heat and humiliation. She hadn't shouted, hadn't threatened. She simply endured, her eyes cold and unwavering. The fruit scattered at her feet, the baguette broken in two, the heat pressing down, and the crowd pretending they hadn't just seen a crime. Yet here she was, still upright, still watching, still calculating. What no one knew, except the boy with the phone and the tiny camera clipped to her collar, was that the story was no longer Cole's to control. His punch hadn't silenced her. It had written his downfall into evidence. And in that moment, as she wiped the blood from her mouth and fixed the cracked glasses back in place, the square became something else entirely. Not just a stage for arrogance, but the opening scene of a reckoning. Cole's smirk stretched wider as he reached for the steel cuffs on his belt. The metallic snap of them opening cut through the thick summer air. He yanked Maya's wrist with unnecessary force and clamped one cold ring shut. Then the other. There he sneered, pushing her a step back. "Now you'll spend the night in a cell for resisting a police officer." The words hung like smoke. The crowd shifted uneasily, murmurs rising in low, nervous waves. I caught fragments. Why would she argue with him? She should have just walked away. Never smart to challenge a cop. It was the language of resignation, the chorus of people convincing themselves injustice was inevitable. Heads shook, some turned away completely, and yet the boy with the phone stayed, hands trembling, his camera catching every second. Maya didn't fight the cuffs. She didn't yank her arms or shout. She simply stood, shoulders squared, her lips still bleeding. To anyone watching, she looked defeated, subdued by the weight of the badge, by the violence already dealt. Cole puffed out his chest drunk, not just on liquor, but on the thrill of domination. He strutted like the square was his stage, like the people watching were his audience. This, he boomed, is what happens when you mouth off to the law. Remember that. A few nervous chuckles rippled through the air, not because anyone found it funny, but because fear makes people laugh in strange ways. Cole fed on it, soaking up the silence that followed like it was applause. For a moment, it looked like he had rewritten the story, that Maya had been reduced to nothing more than another civilian humiliated in public. But then Maya lifted her head. The calm she wore before was gone. In its place was something sharper, colder. Her eyes locked on his, steady as iron, and when she spoke, her voice carried with a precision that cut through every murmur. Special Agent Maya Johnson. She said her words deliberate. FBI, Counterterrorism Division. It was like watching a storm roll over a man's face in real time. Cole froze. His grin faltered lips, twitching as if the word FBI had robbed him of breath. His eyes blinked rapidly behind the mirrored shades before he tore them off, as though clearer sight might change what he'd just heard. His hands twitched against the cuffs he'd just locked. The steel in his grip no longer felt like power, but like evidence of his own crime. A sheen of sweat broke across his forehead, sliding down into the lines of his face. For the first time, his voice wavered. You're what Maya didn't blink. Federal Bureau of Investigation. And you've just assaulted a federal officer in front of witnesses. The crowd gasped as if a curtain had been pulled back. People who moments before had looked away now leaned in, whispering in disbelief. She's FBI, someone hissed. Oh my God. He hit an agent. Cole's throat worked hard, his Adam's apple jerking. His shoulders, so rigid a moment ago, sagged under the sudden weight of what he'd done. He looked smaller somehow, the badge on his chest no longer gleaming, but mocking him in the sunlight. The boy with the phone zoomed in, capturing the sweat, the panic, the shift from predator to prey. His breathing was ragged, but you could hear him whisper to himself, he's done. He's done. Cole's hands, still clutching the cuffs, trembled. He tried to form words, but they caught in his throat. His arrogance had evaporated, replaced by something rawer fear. Real fear. And the square, once heavy with silence, now buzzed with disbelief. A woman near me shook her head. All this time he thought he was the law, she said softly. Turns out he just broke it. In that instant, the story flipped. Maya, who just moments earlier seemed subdued, bled but silent, had revealed herself not as a victim, but as the one person in the square with the authority to strip his illusion of power away. The trap had been set from the moment she let him think he'd won. And now, with one sentence, she had sprung it. Cole's face, once full of smug confidence, was pale and slack-jawed, his breath coming shallow. The heat of the summer had nothing on the fire of realization burning through him. He wasn't untouchable. He was cornered, and everyone knew it. Cole's swagger had crumbled the moment Maya revealed who she was. His face was pale, his mouth dry, but instinct still told him to reach for backup. He fumbled for the radio clipped to his shoulder, his voice cracking as it broke the square's tense silence. Captain Doyle, he stammered, I've got a situation. Urgent. Static hissed back for a moment, then a low voice answered, calm and steady, like someone used to cleaning up other people's messes. Within minutes, a figure appeared from the far side of the square. Captain Frank Doyle. He was tall, with the kind of build that had once been lean, but now carried the heaviness of age. His hair was silvered into a sharp buzz cut. His uniform pressed his stride deliberate. His eyes, dark and calculating, scanned the crowd like a man who had walked into 100 disasters and always found a way to keep them quiet. People shifted as he arrived. There was an authority about him, but not the comforting kind. It was the sort of presence that told you he'd been in charge long enough to know where every body was buried, sometimes literally. Cole's relief was almost pathetic. His shoulders straightened as he blurted out, Captain, thank God. She's claiming to be FBI. This woman came at me. Doyle lifted a hand, silencing him without a word. He didn't even look at Cole. His focus was on Maya. And when he spoke, his tone was smooth, practiced, almost cordial. Agent Johnson, isn't it? His smile was thin, rehearsed. I'm sure this is all just a misunderstanding. Officer Cole here is hot-tempered, yes, but not malicious. Let's have him apologize and put this behind us. It was the kind of line designed not for truth, but for optics. A way to reframe violence as nothing more than an unfortunate mix-up. Maya didn't answer. She simply raised her hand and held out what looked like an ordinary button clip from her blouse. The tiny lens glinted in the sun. Doyle's eyes narrowed for half a second, just long enough for me to catch it, before he rearranged his face into polite indifference. He adjusted his tone, lowering his voice so the words fell heavier. You don't want this to become paperwork, Agent. I know how these things go. Endless reports, hearings, people asking questions that drag on for months. We could resolve this right here internally without dragging half the city into it. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a maneuver. The crowd might not have understood the full weight of what was happening, but you could feel the shift. This wasn't just about one bad cop throwing a punch anymore. This was about the machine that had always been there to protect him. Cole looked at Doyle like a drowning man reaching for a lifeline. He had called for help, and help had come not to protect the public, not to enforce the law, but to shield him from consequence. Maya's silence said everything. She didn't need to argue. The camera in her button had already captured more than words ever could. Doyle's smile lingered, but his eyes betrayed calculation. He was measuring her resolve testing to see if she'd bend. His entire career had been built on intimidation, wrapped in politeness, on the kind of pressure that made most people fold before the fight ever began. But Maya wasn't most people. For the first time since the square had erupted, the crowd seemed to sense what was really at stake. This wasn't about a cigarette anymore. It wasn't even about the punch. It was about whether truth could survive once the system itself stepped in to bury it. Standing there watching Doyle's smile harden against Maya's silence, I felt it in my bones. We weren't just looking at one man's arrogance. We were staring straight into the shadow of something much bigger, much darker. The square had gone quiet again, the strained kind of quiet that comes when a larger voice enters the room. Captain Doyle's smile hovered like a truce flag he had no intention of honoring. Cole stood behind him, hollowed out and sweating, still gripping the authority he no longer owned. Maya didn't argue. She reached into her blouse, thumbed a setting on the small device clipped like a button, then paired it to her phone. A soft chirp, a brief hiss of static, and the past few minutes spilled back into the afternoon loud enough for everyone to hear. First came Cole's drawl, lazy and mean. "Who are you, Safety Patrol?" Some Karen out for her daily complaint. Then Maya's voice, steady, patient, impossible to mistake for provocation. "Please put it out. There are families here." Then the crack. Not a swell or a scuffle, but the single brittle sound of knuckles meeting a face with intent. People flinched, even hearing it replayed, as if the echo could bruise them too. A ripple moved through the crowd. I watched heads jerk up, mouths part shoulders, tense. We weren't guessing anymore. The square wasn't a rumor mill or a Rorschach test. It was evidence. Cole's voice came again, ugly, with triumph. "There, now shut your mouth," and then layered over his swagger his panic of his own call. "Captain Doyle, I've got a situation." Urgent. Doyle's jaw barely moved, but his right hand tightened until the leather of his glove squeaked. His gaze cut to Maya's phone and back calculating that had suddenly turned against him. The polite calm on his face didn't crack, but it flickered the way a fluorescent light does right before it burns out. Maya didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. "Captain," she said, clear and precise, "you are attempting to influence a federal investigation and steer a violent incident off the record. That is obstruction of justice." The phrase hit with a legal weight you could feel under your feet. Obstruction of justice. The words don't sound like sirens, but they do the same work. They tell you a line has been crossed that can't be stepped back over. Cole blinked, then blinked again, like he could clear the word federal out of the air if he tried hard enough. His shoulders slackened. The redness in his face gave way to a waxy pallor. He swallowed, but his throat didn't cooperate. The cuffs on Maya's wrists, his proof of dominance a minute ago, glinted now like a confession. No. Wait," he muttered to nobody. She, the sentence ran out of road. The kid with the phone edged closer, still shaking. I saw the screen from where I stood, the image tight on Maya's collar, then on Cole's face, then on Doyle's slow blink. A chat window flickered up the side. "Is this live? Where is this?" He hit her. Hearts and shocked emojis climbed like bubbles. "Hey," a woman behind me whispered, staring at her own screen. "I'm watching this on Facebook right now. It's streaming." Another voice, "It's on TikTok too. Oh my God, it's everywhere." Doyle heard the word everywhere. His eyes narrowed not in anger, but in strategy, like a chess player who realized the endgame was already on the board. He took a breath, then softened his tone until it nearly sounded kind. "Agent Johnson," he said, "let's not inflame this. We can work something out. Officer Cole will be disciplined. I'll put it in writing. No need to drag your office through a public mess. Half these people will misremember the moment they get home. You know how that goes." It was skillful. It was practiced. It was the voice of a man who had solved problems by making them smaller than their consequences. Maya didn't move. The crowd had given her space without meaning to a small, respectful ring of silence around the center of the square. Her lips still bled slow and bright. When she spoke, her words were careful enough to stand up in court. "What happened here isn't a misunderstanding," she said. "What happens next won't be hidden." Cole's breathing turned shallow. The swagger that had carried him through 100 petty impositions, raised voices, squared shoulders, the easy lies that pass when a badge is your witness, deserted him. His lower lip trembled. He looked not at Maya, not at Doyle, but somewhere past both of them, as if searching for a version of this square where none of this had happened. Then his face folded. A sound tore out of him that didn't belong to a man who believed he was the law. He swallowed a sob and failed. "I'm finished," he whispered, then louder to no one and everyone, "I'm finished." The boy's camera caught it, all the wetness in his eyes, the collapse of his mouth, the way his hands hovered uselessly, lost without orders to give. A hush fell that felt different than the others. Not the hush of fear, the hush of recognition, the moment people realized they just watched a mask come off. Doyle tried to step into the silence. "Agent," he said, softer still, "you have your video, and now there's a live broadcast complicating everything. You don't have to make this worse. I can make calls. We can avoid headlines. We can solve this with a suspension of transfer. No one needs to lose their life over a bad minute." "Someone almost lost more than that," Maya said, nodding toward the tank, toward the families, toward the boy who had not lowered his phone. "And the only reason we're not pretending this never happened is because a child kept filming and I did my job before I ever said I had one." Her gaze shifted briefly to the kid. He stood a little taller, like the acknowledgement put steel in his spine. On his screen, the viewer count jumped again. A comment scrolled by, "Tag the DOJ. Another save this, don't let it disappear." Doyle's smile flattened into a line. The gloves creaked again. He had come to close a circle. Instead, the circle had widened until it included everyone with a signal. "Last chance," he said, and the fatherly cadence slipped, letting the steel show. "And this here." Maya lifted her phone a fraction, and the square filled again, with the unimpeachable memory of what we'd all seen: Cole's voice. The insult, the crack of the punch, the plea for the captain, who was now offering solutions that sounded like erasers. No one looked away anymore. The grandmother with the phone stood at the edge, hand on his shoulder. The stagehands had stopped working. Even the kids fell quiet, sensing that something important was being decided in words they didn't know, but in a tone they understood. "I'm not ending anything," Maya said. "I'm documenting it." The kids' stream pinged with a new wave of comments. A notification tone chimed on somebody's phone, then another, then a chorus. The square wasn't a secret. It was a signal. Cole wiped his face with the back of his hand like he could smear the fear away. He couldn't. He sank half an inch as if the ground had softened beneath him. And Doyle measured carefully. Doyle saw it, the point past which power stops being protection and becomes evidence. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He did what men like him do when cornered. He tried to redefine the corner. "Agent Johnson," he said, "you have what you need. Let's be reasonable." Maya's reply was almost gentle. Reasonable would have been putting out a cigarette. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then she reached toward her collar and stopped the playback. The recording ended on that hollow crack, the square's shared wince hanging in the heat. She slid the phone away, and the afternoon's regular sounds tried to creep back in: the bus brakes, the fountain's hiss, a gull crying overhead. But the moment had hardened into something else. The net wasn't just around Cole anymore. It had cinched around the story itself, around the attempt to manage it, to shrink it, to bury it under paperwork and polite voices. Maya took a slow breath. Her eyes moved from Cole to Doyle, then to the boy who hadn't run. "Captain," she said, steady as a level beam, "we're done negotiating. What came next would be metal and procedure." You could feel it gathering, the finality of it. The square braced without meaning, to the way a body braces when it knows the sound it's about to hear. And then we heard it. The first cold click of a day turning into consequences. The square had already tipped, but in that moment, it broke wide open. Maya stood steady, her lips still, split, her blouse stained faintly with blood. Yet her voice was calm, almost clinical, like she'd done this 100 times before. "Bradley Cole," she said evenly, "you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The words were familiar to everyone, but hearing them, aimed at a police officer, made the air itself feel electric. You could see Cole shrink with every sentence, like each phrase carved another piece out of the illusion he'd built for himself. Then came the sound. Click. The handcuffs his own snapped shut around his wrists. The metallic crack was louder than any punch, sharper than any insult. It ricocheted off the storefronts, the stage scaffolding, the fountain stone, until it felt like the entire square had heard the moment power turned inside out. People gasped, then surged forward with their phones raised high. For years, most had seen clips of brutality, clips of abuse, but never this. Never the badge itself bent back, never the cuffs swung in the other direction. They leaned in, not out. The fear that had scattered them minutes earlier was gone, replaced with awe. One voice broke through, an elderly man near the fountain. "Lord have mercy," he whispered, shaking his head. "I never thought I'd live to see it." The boy who'd been streaming all along had tears shining in his eyes now. His hands trembled as he tapped the screen. With one final breath, he hit send. The video, the insults, the punch, the smirk, the call to Doyle, the collapse shot out of that square and into 1,000 feeds. His chest rose and fell quick, but he didn't drop the phone. He clutched it like proof of courage. Cole's knees gave out. He sagged onto the pavement, the sweat soaking through his shirt. He looked like a balloon with the air punched out, mumbling something that no one could make sense of. The swagger, the grin, the sneer, it was all gone, leaving nothing but a broken man slumped under the weight of his own actions. Doyle stood taller, as though posture alone might save him, but his eyes told the truth. They were hollow now, vacant, darting like a man searching for a door in a room with none. His jaw clenched, but no words came. The captain, who had arrived with the authority of a godfather, now looked like a relic, whose power had expired in the sunlight. And the crowd knew it. You could feel their energy turn, like the tide reversing after years of being pulled the same way. People pointed, shouted, some even cheered. Not out of cruelty, but from the sheer release of seeing something unthinkable, justice flipping the script right in front of them. Another click. Doyle's wrists met steel too. The captain's shoulders barely moved, but the sound hit the square just as hard as the first. The square was no longer ordinary. It was a stage, and everyone watching knew they had just witnessed the climax of a story no one would forget. From a cigarette lit in arrogance, from a single punch thrown in pride, a scandal had bloomed that would shake the department, the city, maybe even more. I can still hear that sound, the cuffs snapping closed. Not just once, but twice. It was the sound of arrogance collapsing. The sound of a system cracking. The sound of accountability echoing where it had been silent too long. And in that silence after, with Cole, broken on the ground, and Doyle staring into emptiness, you understood the square itself had become history. By nightfall, the square had emptied, but the story didn't. It outran us. The boys' stream clipped itself into countless mirrors, phones, laptops, living room TVs stacked on top of one another, until the city felt like it had a single unblinking eye. Anchor said breaking and meant it. The headline was blunt. Officer strikes, woman she's FBI. The clip replayed on a loop, the insult, the crack, the cuffs swinging back. Every time it ended, people were angrier than the time before. By morning, the hashtags had multiplied. The mayor's statement came first, careful and measured. Then the police chiefs, less careful, more defensive, and then under pressure that grew by the hour, another one. By the second sunset, he was gone. Resigned, a press conference that promised change and named almost none of it. The Department of Justice didn't issue promises. It issued subpoenas. They called it a pattern or practice investigation, a long phrase that means we're going to look under every rock you've hidden and the ones you forgot about. Boxes came out of basements, old internal affairs files, the kind with coffee stains and post-it notes that said, "Call me first saw daylight." People who'd stopped believing anyone would listen started talking. A taser report that didn't match a hospital chart. A complaint that had been misfiled. An anger management course signed off but never taken. Settlements sealed so tight, victims learned to keep their grief quiet. It turned out the square wasn't an accident, it was a symptom. Weeks later, I found a seat in the last row of a federal courtroom, the air cool and metallic, the carpet worn flat along the center aisle where years of shoes had traced the same path toward judgment. The seal hung above the bench, eagle shield, Latin that means let justice be done, and for once the words didn't feel like decoration. Maya sat at the government's table. No uniform, no flourish, a navy suit, hair pulled back, a faint healed line along her lip, thin as thread where the punch had split skin. She didn't touch it. She didn't have to. It spoke for itself. Cole sat at the defense table, smaller than the man in the square suit, a shade too large, eyes bright with the kind of worry that keeps you awake at 3 a.m. Doyle sat a chair away, posture correct, jaw set, the old command packed into a tighter box. They didn't look at each other. The judge entered. We rose. We sat. The machinery of law began to hum. The defense went first on theatrics, trying to take back what the video had taken away. They questioned the chain of custody for Maya's device, asked about timestamps, suggested the boy's live stream could have been edited in real time, a phrase that sailed into the room and fell like a stone. They wanted to know whether Maya had provoked the encounter by initiating contact, whether her tone was challenging, whether her request could be construed as an order outside her jurisdiction. The words piled up like sandbags around a flood. But the water rose anyway. The jury watched the clip from the button camera, smoother than the boy's, relentless in its clarity. They listened to Cole's voice, "Who are you?" and Maya's, "Please put it out." They heard the crack and flinched as one. Even inside this calm room, they listened to the radio call, "Captain Doyle. I've got a situation," and then they listened to Doyle's voice in the square, low and reasonable, selling the oldest solution in town. "Let's handle this internally." The prosecution didn't pound the table. It didn't need to. It just laid pieces in a line policy training, distance from ignition source, crowd, density, what a reasonable officer does when warned of risk, what an unreasonable one does when pride gets louder than duty. Maya took the stand briefly. She didn't perform. She didn't offer speeches. She described what she saw, what she said, where she stood, where the tank was, where the ember drifted, why she kept her voice level, why she left him a way out. She talked about the camera as if it were a wrench in a toolkit, useful, not heroic. When the defense tried to tug her into outrage, she refused to go. "Did you expect him to hit you?" the lawyer asked. "No," Maya said. "I expected him to put out his cigarette." The boy testified too. He wore a collared shirt that didn't quite fit, in a look that said he still couldn't believe he was here. His voice wobbled at the start and steadied after the second question. He talked about his hands shaking, about wanting to run about, hearing his mother's voice in his head, telling him to be careful, and deciding care looked different that day. When the defense asked whether he liked attention on social media, he looked confused in a way that cut through every grown-up game in the room. "I didn't want attention," he said. "I wanted the truth to stay." The judge sustained objections when the defense strayed into character attacks. The jury took notes the way juries do when they understand that noise is not evidence. Closing arguments were short. The government quoted policy and played the audio one last time, stopping on the line where Maya said, "Please," and on the line where Doyle said, "We can resolve this internally." The defense talked about a bad minute, about stress, about miscommunication, about how things look different in heat and hindsight. It asked for mercy without managing to explain why justice should yield to it. The jury went out with sandwiches and paper bags. They were back before the coffee cooled. Guilty. On the charge of assaulting a federal officer, Bradley Cole, guilty. On the charge of obstruction of justice, Frank Doyle, guilty. The words didn't ring. They landed. You could feel them settle into place, heavy and right. Cole's head dropped, then jerked up as if he'd forgotten to breathe. Doyle stared forward, eyes unfocused, the calculation finally out of options. People don't cheer in federal court. That's not how it works. But in the hall, after I heard exhalations that sounded like relief, the boy stood with his mother's arm around his shoulders while strangers thanked him for something he still called just filming. A woman from the square, the grandmother with the little boy, wiped her eyes and said, "About time." No one argued with her. News crawls sprinted again. Statement writers earned their paychecks. The DOJ's broader report would take months, maybe longer, but the outline was already visible. A department that had forgotten its own slogan until a crowd, a camera, and an agent on her day off reminded it. Was it satisfying? Yeah. The verdict felt like a hand finally finding the right lever. But in the quiet after, when the courtroom emptied and the building returned to fluorescent normal, the larger truth stayed put. This was never just about a single fist or a single man. It was about a way of doing business that counted on silence to keep going. That day in court, silence lost. And for the first time in a long time, the city sounded different. Not loud, not triumphant, just clearer. As if the noise had been part of the problem and we'd finally tuned to a frequency where consequences could be heard. The verdict didn't take long to ripple outward. Within weeks, sentences were handed down. Bradley Cole, the man who had lit a cigarette, thrown a punch, and believed himself untouchable, was given 5 years and 6 months in federal prison. No parole, no shortcuts, just years behind steel living with the echo of the handcuffs he once carried for others. Captain Frank Doyle fared no better. He lost his badge, his pension, the reputation he had built over decades. A man who had once walked like the system itself stood now as proof of how rotten that system could become. His career didn't just end, it unraveled in the spotlight thread by thread. The court also ruled in Maya's favor. $500,000 in restitution. The number made headlines, but Maya's words stole them back. "I won't keep a dime," she announced. "Every cent goes to a foundation for victims of police violence. Justice isn't about profit, it's about healing." And she meant it. You could see it in the quiet firmness with which she delivered the statement, like someone who knew the difference between victory for herself and victory for others. Then came the boy, the witness whose trembling hands had steadied long enough to capture the truth. He was called to the front of the courtroom, his mother's hand on his back, his chin still a little uncertain, but lifted higher than the day in the square. Maya met him at eye level, crouching slightly, so she wasn't speaking down to him, but to him. Her voice softened, shedding every ounce of the steel she'd shown in court. "You were braver than many adults today," she told him, and because of that, the truth survived. The boy blinked fast, his eyes shining, and nodded. He didn't need to say anything. The weight of her words would follow him longer than applause ever could. Weeks later, cameras gathered again, but not in a courtroom. This time in the grand rotunda of the Capitol, where marble columns carried echoes instead of accusations. Maya stood before members of Congress, not in uniform, not even in her role as prosecutor's witness, but as a citizen who had refused to let silence rule. To protect and serve, she said, her voice carrying across the chamber, is not a slogan. It is a responsibility. It is a promise made to the people, not a privilege to be abused. And if the system forgets that promise, then the people, the cameras, the witnesses, the courage of a child will remind it. The applause that followed wasn't wild. It was steady, respectful, the kind that means people understood rather than just agreed. Across the country, conversations bloomed. In diners and barbershops, in churches and libraries. People didn't just argue about Cole or Doyle. They talked about what their badges should mean, what their neighbors deserved, what silence had cost them all these years. For some, it was outrage. For others, relief. But for many, it was something rare hope. Because justice had not only punished, it had illuminated. And yet the story didn't end in fireworks or speeches. It lingered in smaller places, in the way parents looked at their children and told them courage mattered, in the way communities spoke of accountability without lowering their voices, in the way one boy checked his phone and saw strangers from across the country thanking him for holding it steady. When I think back on it, the square feels like both the smallest corner of the city and the largest stage in the world. A cigarette lit, a punch thrown, a truth revealed, and from it, a chain reaction no one could stop. In the end, the lesson wasn't complicated. It wasn't buried in law books or carved in marble. It was simple, almost painfully so. Justice does not come from a badge. Justice comes from truth and from the courage to carry it into the light. And as long as people remember that, the echo of that day will never really fade. And that brings us to the end of this story. What happened to Maya, to Cole, and to Doyle isn't just about one moment in a city square. It's about courage, accountability, and the truth that justice doesn't live in a badge, but in people brave enough to stand up. If this story moved you, we'd love for you to like this video, share it with others, and of course hit that subscribe button to follow more powerful stories here on Mr. Max Stories. Your support isn't just a number, it's what fuels our team to keep creating meaningful, heartfelt content that speaks to justice, compassion, and the strength of ordinary people. So remember our symbol here at Mr. Max Stories. Every story is more than just words. It's a spark that keeps hope alive. Thank you for being part of this journey with us.